Hello and welcome to Umbral Dread. Before we begin, take a moment to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I always enjoy reading them. If you enjoy slow, unsettling stories that gently draw you deeper into the shadows, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Now get comfortable. Let your body settle into stillness and allow the outside world to fade into silence. Tonight, something waits in the dark, just beyond your sight. So close your eyes. Listen carefully. And let yourself drift into the depths of Umbral Dread. Story 1. At 8 p.m., the automatic doors slid open with that soft mechanical sigh they always make, and a kid with a runny nose wandered into the pharmacy by himself. It was a Thursday, which meant late-night shopping hours. We stayed open until 9:00, and Thursdays were usually slow in the last hour. Most people came in right after work for cold medicine or deodorant or to grab something they forgot at the grocery store. Then it would go quiet. The kind of quiet where you can hear the lights buzzing and the air conditioning kick on and off, even in winter. I didn't think it was that strange to see a kid alone at first. I grew up with a mom who smoked like a chimney and treated stores like free babysitters. She'd park me in an aisle with the candy and disappear for 20 minutes while she stood outside with her cigarette, talking to someone she knew or just staring into space. I learned early that adults could lose track of time the moment they weren't responsible for anything living. So when the kid walked in alone, I assumed his parent was nearby. Maybe in the parking lot. Maybe in the toiletries aisle. Maybe chatting at the counter. In a pharmacy, kids drift. Parents get distracted reading labels and prices. And if you've ever tried to pick between 15 different cough syrups, you know how easy it is to forget the rest of the world exists. I was in the lifestyle aisle, stocking Blackmore vitamins. I remember the brand name because I was stacking those bottles like bricks, trying to make the shelf look neat even though I knew it wouldn't last. People grab vitamins, compare labels, then put them back in the wrong spot. It's like a game they play with us. That night, I was also doing something I'm not proud of, but I'm not going to pretend I wasn't. Vitamin prices had gotten insane, and my paycheck hadn't. I'd started swiping a bottle here and there. Fish oil, multivitamins, magnesium, the stuff people buy constantly. And then I'd adjust the count on the sheet later. It wasn't some grand theft plan. It was the kind of small, quiet theft people justify when they feel trapped and tired and convinced the world is already stealing from them. I had one bottle in my apron pocket and another in my hand when I felt someone staring at me. I turned and saw the kid standing at the end of the aisle, just watching. He didn't look scared. He looked curious, like he'd walked into a place he wasn't supposed to be and wasn't sure whether to commit to it. He had pale skin and light brown hair that stuck up in odd places like he'd been rubbing his head against the pillow. His nose was red from wiping, and he kept sniffing like he didn't know whether he was sick or just cold. He was small enough that he had to tilt his head back to look up at me. He stared for a long moment, and I could feel my body tighten because of what I was holding. I wasn't expecting a witness. I wasn't expecting anyone to notice anything. After a stretch of silence, he said, very politely, "Hello." It came out like he'd practiced it. Hi, I replied, shifting the vitamin bottle behind my body without thinking. His eyes flicked to my hands. "What are you doing?" he asked. It wasn't accusatory. It wasn't the tone of a kid trying to tattle. It was plain curiosity, like he truly didn't know what any of it meant. I cleared my throat and decided to play it normal. "Stocking shelves," I said. "Just putting stuff back where it belongs." He stepped closer, looking at the bottles like they were toys. "What's that?" "Vitamins," I said. "Like candy?" "Not really," I told him. They help your body. Like, if you don't get enough of certain things from food, vitamins can help. He blinked like he was working hard to understand. Why do you need them? I could have brushed him off. I could have said, go find your parents. But the aisle was empty, and the kids' questions were kind of normal, innocent. And I was already anxious from what I was doing, so answering him felt safer than telling him to leave. I gave him the simplest explanation I could. Your body needs different things to stay healthy, I said. Some vitamins help your bones. Some help your muscles. Some help your immune system. He nodded like he understood, even though I'm not sure he did. Kids will nod at anything if it sounds confident. Then he followed me. Not in a creepy way, just in that clingy way some kids do when they decide you are their temporary adult. Wherever I moved, he moved. He asked questions about every label, every picture, every word he could read. At first, I kept my distance. Then, after a few minutes, I started handing him bottles to place on the shelf. It made him happy. Kids love being useful. It makes them feel like they belong somewhere. Can you put this one down on the bottom? I asked, giving him a big bottle of fish oil that looked almost too heavy for him. He held it with both hands and studied the label seriously. Does fish oil taste like fish fingers? I laughed. Not at all. He looked disappointed and a little relieved at the same time. Good. Want to try? I asked, joking. He went red instantly. I can't swallow tablets, he said. The way he said it sounded like an admission, like something he'd been scolded for before. That's okay, I told him quickly. Some people can't. Doesn't matter. He sniffed again and wiped his nose with the back of his sleeve. His jacket was too thin for the season, and the cuffs were worn. Not ripped, but worn in that way that suggests it's been washed 100 times and handed down at least once. I tried to casually look toward the front of the store, expecting to see a parent at the counter or browsing somewhere, but I couldn't see anyone who looked like they were with him. The front was quiet. No one calling his name. No adults scanning the aisles with that irritated parent look. I told myself they were in the bathroom, or in the pharmacy section talking to the pharmacist, or outside smoking. Normal explanations. Still, time kept moving. The store's background music looped the same soft songs. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The night shift felt longer than usual. At around 8:30, I started feeling uneasy. It wasn't just that the kid was still with me. It was the fact that he didn't seem worried at all. If I'd been that young and separated from my parents in a store for half an hour, I would have been either crying or trying to act tough while I panicked inside. This kid acted like this was exactly where he was supposed to be. At 9 p.m., the store fell into that deep quiet that happens when the last customers leave. I heard the automatic doors open once and close again, and then nothing. The front of the store looked empty. The parking lot outside looked mostly empty, too, just a few cars under the orange lot lights. Everybody had gone home to their families. Everyone except the kid. He still followed me up and down the aisle, asking questions. What's immunity? He asked. Why do grown-ups take so many pills? He asked. Is it true you can die if you eat too many vitamins? He asked. I kept answering because I didn't know what else to do, but my mind was racing now. I had work to finish. I needed to lock the doors. I needed to count the register and start closing procedures. But I couldn't just walk this kid outside into the dark and tell him good luck. Finally, I stopped and crouched so I was closer to his level. Hey, I said gently, where are your parents? He looked at me like the question was strange. Bargo, he said. I blinked. Bargo? He nodded. Like that explained everything. I'd lived in this area for 7 years, and I'd never heard of a town called Bargo. I'd heard of most of the towns around here, even the tiny ones, because people in pharmacies talk. They tell you where they drive in from, they complain about the distance, they make small talk while waiting for prescriptions. Where's that? I asked. Virginia, he said. That made my stomach drop. Virginia was not a nearby town. It was 2 states over. Okay, I said slowly, trying not to sound alarmed. Who are you here with? He hesitated. Dave. Dave, I repeated. Who's Dave? My uncle, he said, but the last word came out like a question, like he wasn't fully sure. Uncle, I said. Okay, that's your mom or dad's brother. He nodded, but it didn't look like understanding. It looked like agreement. Is Dave here? I asked. Is he in the store? Is he parked nearby? The kid shook his head. I stood up slowly, trying to keep my voice steady even though my brain had started screaming the obvious. A kid this young didn't wander into a pharmacy alone at night with no adult nearby unless something was wrong. Does Dave have a number? I asked. He stared at his shoes. I'm not supposed to use the phones. That answer made me angry for a second, not at the kid, but at the kind of adult who would tell a child not to use phones in an emergency. It sounded like control, like rules designed to keep a kid quiet. I glanced toward the front. The pharmacist had already left. The one other employee on shift had clocked out and gone home, leaving me as the only staff in the store. That had happened before on slow nights, and usually it wasn't a problem. Now it felt like the worst possible situation. I looked down at the kid again. What's your name? I asked. Callum, he said. Callum, I repeated. Okay, Callum, listen. We're going to find someone to come get you. He didn't look relieved. He looked tense, like that wasn't allowed. I checked the time again and did that fast mental math you do when you're deciding whether to involve police. If no one showed up by 9:30, I'd have to call. I knew that. There wasn't really another option. And once you call, you're in it. Paperwork. Statements. Questions. The possibility that you misread something, and now you're the guy who called cops over a kid whose uncle was just outside buying gas. But something about the kid's answers and the way he clung to me told me this wasn't a simple misunderstanding. So I waited, keeping Callum with me at the front of the store. I tried to keep him calm, offered him a bottle of water, asked him what grade he was in, what cartoons he liked. He gave short answers. He kept glancing toward the doors like he was listening for someone's footsteps. At around 9:20, just when I was about to pick up the phone, I saw headlights sweep across the front window. A car rolled into the parking lot and stopped close to the entrance. A portly man in his mid-40s got out wearing a red sweater. He stood outside the glass, cupping his hands around his eyes to see inside, like he didn't trust the light. Then he called out. Callum? Callum, are you there? Callum's whole body shifted. He didn't run toward the man, but he went rigid, like a dog hearing its owner's voice and not knowing whether it's about to be praised or punished. I went to the front and unlocked the door, Callum close behind me. The man rushed in like he'd been holding his breath. He gripped my hand hard enough that his ring dug into my skin. Thank God for you, he said. Thank God. I almost had a heart attack. His parents would kill me if they knew where he was. He laughed a little, but it sounded forced. His eyes kept flicking to Callum, not with relief exactly, but with that sharp kind of attention adults give when they're trying to control a situation. He's a good kid, I said, because it felt like the right thing to say. And it was true. Callum had been polite, curious. He hadn't caused trouble. I'm glad I could help, I added. The man pulled Callum toward him and wrapped an arm around his neck, yanking him into a hug that looked more like restraint than affection. Callum's face pressed against the man's sweater, and his eyes stayed open, staring past me. He gets a little nervous, the man said, speaking loudly, like he was performing for my benefit. He thinks he's low on his prescription meds. I keep telling him we've still got a whole sleeve of tablets left at home. My stomach tightened. Callum didn't look up. He didn't respond. He just stood there, still, like he didn't want to move wrong. The man kept smiling. "Thanks again," he said. "Really. You did a good thing." He steered Callum out the door. As he opened the car door for Callum, he smacked the back of Callum's head. Not hard enough to knock him down, but hard enough to be a message. Callum flinched like he was used to it. I watched them drive away, and a sick feeling crawled up my spine. The man's kindness had looked real for a second, but now it felt rehearsed, like he knew exactly how to sound to a stranger in a uniform. I went back inside, locked the door, and began closing down. My hands were shaking slightly as I twisted the key in the padlock. I told myself the kid was safe now because he was with an adult. I told myself my job was done. I told myself I shouldn't invent a disaster where there isn't one. Then the thought hit me, clean and sharp, so obvious it made me feel stupid for not noticing sooner. Callum couldn't swallow tablets. He'd said it so clearly in the aisle, his face turning red with embarrassment, like it was a problem he'd been shamed for before. Yet the man in the red sweater had just told me Callum panics when he thinks he's low on his prescription meds, and he'd specifically mentioned tablets. I stood there in the locked pharmacy, staring at my own reflection in the glass door, feeling the air change around me. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe Callum had meant big tablets, and his prescription was tiny. Maybe he'd learned to swallow them since he'd said that. Maybe the man just used the wrong word. But the way Callum flinched when he got hit didn't feel like nothing. And the way he didn't run to his uncle didn't feel like nothing either. I cleaned the counter slowly, mind replaying every detail. Callum's runny nose, the thin jacket, the way he said, "My uncle?" like he wasn't sure. The way he said he wasn't supposed to use phones. The way he'd been calm for an hour in a pharmacy, but tense the second the man arrived. By the time I finished closing, it was after 10:00. The parking lot was empty. The street outside was dark. The store lights were off behind the metal gate. I stood by my car for a long time with my keys in my hand, fighting with myself. "Call the police," my brain said. "Report it. You have a name. You have a vehicle description. You have a time and a place. Don't ruin a kid's life with a false report," another part of me argued. "Don't ruin your own job. You stole vitamins. You don't want cops asking questions. You didn't see a crime, you saw a smack, and you felt uneasy." But my gut wouldn't settle. I drove home with the radio off, listening to the sound of my tires on the road, and the whole time I kept hearing Callum's small voice in the aisle. I can't swallow tablets. I didn't sleep well that night. I kept imagining him in the back seat of that car, quiet and small, watching streetlights pass and not knowing whether he was going home or somewhere else. The next morning, I went to work again and acted normal. I didn't tell anyone at first because I didn't know how to say it without sounding paranoid, and because there was a part of me that wanted to forget. Forgetting is easy when you're tired. But I couldn't forget. I checked the local news for missing kid reports. I checked community pages. I checked the store's security footage policy. I told myself I was being responsible. I told myself I was just making sure he was okay. And every time I tried to convince myself it was nothing, that same detail returned and sat in my chest like a stone. Callum couldn't swallow tablets. Story 2. A month ago, I was desperate for work. The kind of desperate where you stop caring whether a job feels right, and you only care that it pays. I applied to a private security firm I found online, one of those companies with a clean website, stock photos of guards in pressed uniforms, and vague promises about protecting people and property. I expected the usual process: background checks, references, some long wait. Instead, everything happened fast. I filled out a basic application one night, and the next morning I got an email telling me to come in for an interview. The office was in a plain building with tinted windows and no sign out front. Inside, the lobby smelled like copier toner and cheap air freshener. A man in a dark gray suit met me right away. He didn't offer coffee. He didn't ask me to sit for long. He didn't ask about my previous experience, which should have been the first red flag. Most security jobs want to know where you've worked, whether you've done nights, whether you've dealt with conflict. This guy asked me 3 things. Did I have family in the area? Did I have a girlfriend? Was I comfortable working alone at night? The questions were delivered in a calm, friendly voice, but they didn't feel like normal HR questions. They felt like someone checking whether I had anyone who would notice me missing. I told him the truth. I lived alone. No partner. No close family nearby. I needed the money. I watched his mouth lift into a small smile, almost like relief. He stood up, walked to a cabinet, and handed me a uniform in a clear plastic bag. Shirt, pants, patch, radio clip. Then he said, like it was already decided, "You're hired." I barely had time to process it. I asked about training, about orientation, about paperwork. He said a supervisor at the site would handle it. He gave me a badge with my photo printed on it, even though nobody had taken my picture in the office. I didn't ask how that was possible. I was tired. I was hungry. I told myself not to be paranoid. 2 days later, they assigned me to a hospital. Not a small one. A massive complex that looked like it could swallow a whole neighborhood. Multiple buildings. Multiple wings. Some old brick sections and some newer glass towers. Elevated walkways connecting buildings like veins. Parking garages stacked high. A constant stream of ambulances and delivery trucks and employees moving in and out like the place never truly slept. My assignment was very specific. I was to guard the 4th floor of the East Wing. The East Wing was older. You could see it in the walls and the lighting and the way the hallways didn't line up perfectly. The newer parts of the hospital had clean signs and modern doors. The East Wing had scuffed tile, faded paint, and that stale smell old buildings get when they've been cleaned 1,000 times and still won't feel fresh. On my first night, I rode the elevator up to the 4th floor and stepped out into a hallway that looked normal until I saw the barrier. The entire entrance to the floor, double doors wide enough to push beds through, had been sealed off. Not just closed, sealed. Thick, heavy, milky white plastic sheeting covered the doors and the walls around them. The plastic was taped completely along the edges with wide silver duct tape, pressed hard into the corners where the wall met the floor and ceiling. Across the center of the plastic, red warning tape was crossed in an X. The tape had bold black lettering that you couldn't miss even if you wanted to. Caution, asbestos abatement in progress. Authorized personnel only. Strict biohazard protocols apply. It looked like something out of a movie, the kind of setup that practically begs people to touch it. But the warnings were enough to make most sane people step back. My post was a folding desk placed directly in front of the barrier, like a guard booth without walls. A cheap chair, a small lamp, a clipboard for logs, a radio. That was it. A supervisor met me there and ran through the instructions. He repeated the warnings about chemicals and dust. He told me the stuff inside the sealed area was highly toxic. He said my only job was to make sure nobody tampered with the plastic and nobody tried to enter the floor. He told me to stay in the chair, do hourly radio checks, and keep people away. No patrols inside, no curiosity, no exceptions. I asked who would be working in there at night, And he said, "Nobody. That's why we pay you. People get ideas." Then he left. My shift was midnight to 8 in the morning. For the first week, it was the most boring job I've ever had. The hallway stayed empty. A few nurses walked past occasionally, but none of them went near the plastic. Nobody even looked at it. They walked by like it was a blank wall. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed constantly. Not loud enough to complain about, but loud enough to fill your brain if you sit still too long. I brought a book and finished it in 2 nights. I brought another and finished that too. Once an hour, I pressed the radio button, said my unit number, and reported the 4th floor secure. The dispatcher acknowledged. Then, silence returned. I liked the quiet. After weeks of job hunting and being broke, quiet felt like stability. And I needed the paycheck, so I didn't ask questions. Then, the sound started. It happened in my second week, around 3 in the morning. I remember the time because I had checked it on my phone and thought, only 5 more hours. I was fighting to keep my eyes open. The hospital was at its lowest point of activity, still not silent, because hospitals never fully go quiet, but quiet enough that you could hear your own swallowing. That's when I heard it from behind the plastic. A sharp, rhythmic squeak. Squeak. Pause. Squeak. Not a mouse, not a pipe, not a vent. It was the exact sound of a rusty wheel turning on hard tile. I recognized it instantly. When I was a teenager, I spent a few weeks in a hospital after an accident. I still remember certain sounds from that time. Monitor beeps, call buttons, the soft rubbery shuffle of nurses' shoes, and the squeak of an IV pole being dragged down a hallway. I sat up straight. My mouth went dry. I stared at the milky plastic, but it was too thick to see through. Whatever lights were on in there were off. The plastic looked like fog trapped in a sheet. I stood and walked close. The air near the barrier felt colder than the hallway, but I assumed that was my imagination. I pressed my ear closer without actually touching the plastic. The squeaking moved slowly, like something rolling away from me, then stopped. A few seconds later, I heard crying, muffled by the plastic, but unmistakable. It was soft and exhausted and broken. The sobbing of a small child who had been crying for a long time and didn't have energy left. It sounded like that awful stage where kids stop yelling and just make those quiet, desperate noises because they've run out of hope that anyone will come. I stood there frozen, my heartbeat picking up. There was no reason for a child to be on the other side of that barrier. No reason at all. I leaned closer to the plastic and spoke into it like it was a door. "Hello?" My voice sounded too loud in the empty corridor. "Is someone in there?" The crying stopped instantly. No more squeaking. No rustle. Nothing. Just the fluorescent hum and the faint, distant hospital sounds bleeding up through vents. I went back to the desk and sat down, trying to make my breathing normal. I told myself sound travels strangely in big buildings. I told myself the crying was probably coming from somewhere else, maybe maternity, maybe the ER, maybe a patient room, and the plastic and the duct tape were acting like a weird speaker system. I told myself I was tired, and my brain was filling in details because it didn't like the quiet. That explanation held me together for one night. The next night it happened again. This time it wasn't just sound. It was shortly after 2 in the morning. I remember because I was sipping coffee and thinking about how bad it tasted. I heard a soft rustling, like fingers rubbing against plastic. The sound was close, right on the other side. I looked up. The hallway light above my desk threw a dull shine on the milky plastic. And then, pushing against the surface from the other side, I saw a shadow. Small, child-sized. It stood directly behind the double doors, right where a person would stand if they wanted to get out. Then 2 small hands pressed against the plastic. I saw the outline of fingers, each one pushing the material outward. The plastic bowed toward me slightly under the pressure, like it was being tested. Like whatever was on the other side was learning how far it could push. My coffee cup slipped out of my hand and hit the floor. Coffee splashed everywhere. I didn't care. Another small shadow joined the first. Then another. 3 child-sized shapes, pressing their hands to the barrier. Not pounding, not screaming, just standing there in darkness, hands out, as if they expected someone to take them. I backed away from the desk until my shoulders hit the opposite wall. My hands shook so badly I could feel it all the way into my elbows. I reached for the radio, then stopped. What was I going to say? Dispatch, I have 3 children inside the asbestos abatement zone. I wasn't brave. I'm still not. But I'm also not someone who can shrug off things I see with my own eyes. Hospitals are places where people die. Old buildings hold on to stories. When you spend enough time around a hospital, you start believing in things you wouldn't believe anywhere else. So my mind reached for the simplest explanation that let me keep functioning. The 4th floor was haunted. Maybe it used to be pediatrics. Maybe kids had died up there decades ago, and now they were trapped in the space, replaying their last days. That would explain the IV pole sound. That would explain the crying. That would explain the hands on the plastic. And it would explain why the floor was sealed. Maybe the asbestos warning was a cover story, a lie to keep staff from talking, a lie to keep curious people away from the part of the building where the dead still moved. I stood there and watched. After a few minutes, the hands withdrew. The plastic smoothed out. The shadows faded into the dark like someone had turned them off. When my shift ended at 8, I felt like I'd been awake for 3 days. The morning guard came in, cheerful in the way people are when they think nothing happens at night. I handed him the radio, said it was quiet, and walked straight to the elevator without looking back. Down on the ground floor, there was a small cafeteria near the main lobby where staff grabbed coffee before their shifts. It was bright and smelled like burned espresso and fryer oil. I bought a black coffee and sat alone in the corner, trying to settle my nerves with something normal. A few minutes later, an older woman in light blue scrubs sat at the table next to mine. Her badge said head nurse. She looked exhausted, staring at her coffee like it had personally betrayed her. I decided to ask. I needed to know if my theory made sense. "Excuse me," I said quietly. She looked up, saw my security uniform, and her expression tightened as if she'd already decided she didn't like talking to me. "Yes?" she asked. "I work nights," I said. "I'm assigned to the 4th floor of the East Wing, the one sealed off for asbestos." The moment I said 4th floor, all the color drained out of her face. Her eyes darted around the cafeteria, checking who might be listening. Her hand tightened on her cup. "What about it?" she asked, and her voice went sharp, defensive. "I was just wondering," I said, trying to sound casual even though my throat felt tight. "Was that floor pediatrics before? Was it the children's ward?" She stared at me like I'd put a knife on the table. Then she leaned in, close enough that I could smell stale coffee on her breath. "Listen to me very carefully," she whispered. Her voice shook, but her tone was harsh, like she was angry at me for being curious. "You get paid to sit in a chair," she said. "You do not get paid to ask questions." I blinked, not sure I'd heard right. I saw some things and I heard. "I don't care what you heard." She cut in, fast, like she didn't want the words hanging in the air. Her eyes were wide with something that looked like real fear. "Do your job. Look the other way. If you want to keep breathing, You will never ask anyone about that floor again. Forget the children. Forget you ever heard anything. She stood up so abruptly, her chair scraped loud across the tile. She left her coffee untouched and walked out like she was escaping a fire. I sat there, staring at my cup, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. That wasn't how someone reacts to ghost stories. That was how someone reacts to something they know is real and dangerous. I went home, locked my apartment door, and tried to sleep. I couldn't. Every time I started to drift, I saw the small hands pressing against the plastic. I heard the tired sobbing. My mind kept trying to build a picture of what the fourth floor used to look like, what kinds of kids had been there, how many. That night I went back to work anyway, because I needed the money, and because pretending things are normal is easier than changing your life. I arrived at midnight, took the radio from the evening guard, and sat at my desk. The hallway was quiet. The fluorescent hum filled everything. The plastic barrier looked the same as always. At 1 a.m, I decided to walk the perimeter of the barrier. It covered the double doors and extended along the walls a few feet on either side, taped down in wide strips. I grabbed my flashlight and inspected the edges, checking for tampering, trying to focus on something practical. That's when I noticed the tear. Down near the floor, bottom right corner, the silver tape had begun to peel away. A small gap had formed. The plastic was torn slightly, creating an opening big enough to slide a hand through. I knelt down to inspect it. I assumed the plastic had stretched, or someone had bumped it, or the tape had lost stickiness in the cold. I shined my flashlight into the gap, and lying on the floor tiles just outside the barrier was a small object. I reached out and picked it up. A lollipop, cherry flavored, bright red candy, white paper stick, wrapper twisted tightly at the base like someone had pulled it off and then crumpled it back around the stick. The top half of the candy was missing. It had been eaten. I touched the remaining candy with my thumb. It was sticky, fresh. The paper stick was damp with saliva. All the air went out of my lungs. My ghost explanation collapsed instantly. Ghosts don't eat candy. Ghosts don't leave wet lollipops. I stood up slowly, lollipop in my hand, and looked at the plastic barrier like it was no longer a warning sign, but a curtain. I thought about the head nurse. I thought about her words, if you want to keep breathing. I put the lollipop in my pocket. Then I made the worst decision of my life. I grabbed the loose edge of plastic and pulled. The duct tape tore away from the wall with a loud ripping sound that echoed down the hallway. I kept pulling until the gap was wide enough for my shoulders. My heart was pounding so hard it made me dizzy. I took a breath, squeezed through, and stepped onto the fourth floor. The first thing I noticed was the air. It didn't smell like dust or construction. It didn't smell like mold or old paint. It was freezing cold, and it smelled sharply of bleach, iodine, and sterile alcohol. The smell was so strong it stung my eyes. This wasn't an abandoned area. This was a cleaned area, a maintained area. I turned on my flashlight and aimed it down the hallway. The walls weren't torn apart. The ceiling tiles were intact. The floor was seamless white linoleum, polished so clean it reflected light like water. Everything looked spotless, like a place designed to be disinfected quickly. I walked slowly, my boots oddly quiet on the smooth floor. I passed the first set of rooms. Each door had a small glass window. I looked inside. Hospital beds were gone. In the center of each room was a stainless steel surgical table. Above each table hung a massive multi-bulb surgical light. Along the walls were monitors, ventilators, rolling metal trays. The trays were covered with neatly arranged surgical tools, clean and organized like someone had just laid them out and stepped away for a moment. There were rows of these rooms, 10, maybe 12, identical. My mouth went dry. My flashlight beam shook slightly as my hand trembled. I followed the corridor as it curved left. The hallway opened into a larger space at the end, almost like a waiting area, wider than the rest. That's where I heard the dragging. Wet, heavy, slow, like raw meat being pulled across polished linoleum. I froze and aimed my flashlight down the hallway. Something moved into the beam. At first, my brain tried to label it as a person, just because that's what brains do. They try to make the world fit into known shapes. But it wasn't a person. It was a mound of flesh, huge, the size of a small car, blocking the hall. A shifting mass of skin and muscle and hair. Thick black stitches held sections together in chaotic patterns, as if it had been assembled quickly and badly. Random limbs stuck out of it, small arms and legs at wrong angles, pushing against the floor to drag the bulk forward. Then I saw the faces. Children's faces, embedded in the flesh like they'd been fused into it. Eyes open, blinking blindly in my flashlight beam. Small mouths opening and closing, gasping for air that the shared body could barely pull in. Some of the faces were weeping thick, clear fluid. Some were frozen in silent expressions of pain that looked permanent. The thing dragged itself forward using a cluster of mismatched arms that slapped the floor wetly with every movement. It noticed my light. The entire mass shifted, and the faces turned toward me. A low, unified, gurgling moan rolled down the corridor, vibrating in the sterile air. Then, it moved faster. The limbs scrambled with terrifying speed, propelling the heavy mound of flesh straight toward me. The wet slapping sound echoing like someone running barefoot through a slaughterhouse. I dropped my flashlight. I turned and ran. The hallway felt endless. My boots finally made sound now, loud against the linoleum. Behind me, the creature was impossibly fast, closing the distance with wet, frantic movement and choking moans. I knew I wasn't going to make it back to the plastic barrier. The hall was too long. The thing was too close. I looked at the doors on either side. The surgical rooms had windows. If I hid there, it would see me immediately. Halfway down, I saw a solid wooden door with no window. A small plaque beside it read supply closet. I grabbed the handle, twisted, and yanked it open. I dove inside and pulled the door shut, but I didn't close it completely. I left it cracked a fraction, just enough to see, just enough to breathe. The closet was small and packed with clean linens and boxes of latex gloves. The smell inside was still sterile, but it had that dry fabric scent too, like laundry sealed away. I pressed my face to the crack and held my breath. The wet slapping grew deafening. The mound slithered past the closet. I saw faces go by in fragments. A blond boy's cheek fused into someone else's shoulder. A little girl's eye blinking wildly where an eye shouldn't be. Skin of different shades stitched together with thick thread like a crude patchwork. The smell hit me harder as it passed. Iodine, fresh blood, and something like medical waste. The sour underside of cleanliness. It dragged itself onward, heading toward the plastic barrier where I'd entered. I stood shaking so hard my teeth chattered. My mind couldn't hold what I'd seen. It didn't belong in a hospital. It didn't belong in the world. I felt like I'd stepped behind reality and found the machinery. I waited for it to go farther, planning to run the moment the hallway cleared. Then I heard a heavy mechanical chime. An elevator. Not the normal elevator I'd used. This was deeper, louder, industrial. The service freight elevator in the back of the East Wing. I knew the hospital layout enough to know that elevator connected directly to underground loading docks. It bypassed public areas completely. It was for supplies, equipment, Bodies. I peered through the crack. The metal doors of the freight elevator slid open. Bright light poured out into the hallway. People stepped out. Two men in expensive tailored suits carrying leather briefcases. They walked like they owned the building, like they were touring a facility, not entering a hidden ward full of surgical theaters. Behind them came four men in dark uniforms. My stomach flipped because the uniforms were the same as mine, the exact same patch, the exact same color, my security firm. And walking among them was the man who had hired me. The dark gray suit, the calm smile, the questions about whether I had anyone nearby. They were holding children's hands, 6 children between 5 and 10, cheap clothes, thin bodies, faces gray with fear and exhaustion. One little boy clutched a dirty stuffed animal so hard his knuckles were white. A little girl beside him was crying quietly, wiping her cheeks with an oversized sleeve. One guard yanked a boy forward roughly, and he stumbled. No one comforted him. No one spoke gently. They moved with efficiency, like this was routine. The executive stopped in the hallway and pointed toward the surgical rooms. "Prepare rooms 1 through 6, one of them said. His voice was casual, like ordering coffee. "Clients are arriving in 2 hours. We need the extractions completed and the products iced before transport. We cannot afford another delay." My supervisor nodded like he understood perfectly. He gestured to the guards. "Get them prepped," he said. "Strip them, wash them, strap them down. The surgical team is in the service elevator coming up next." The guards dragged the children toward the rooms. One girl with braided hair tried to pull her hand free. She cried out in a language I didn't recognize. The guard didn't shout. He just tightened his grip and dragged her across the floor like she was luggage. I covered my mouth to stop myself from making a sound. Tears poured down my face silently, hot against my skin. I watched until the children were pushed into the operating rooms, and then the doors shut. I stayed in that closet. I'm ashamed of it, but I stayed. I stayed for 5 hours. I listened to the elevator come and go. I heard the surgical team arrive. I heard monitors start up, steady beeping. I heard muffled mechanical humming that I knew, even without seeing it, came from tools that cut bone and flesh. I heard sounds that I can't describe without feeling sick. I sat on the floor among clean linens and boxes of gloves, breathing through my sleeve, doing absolutely nothing, while 6 children were murdered a few yards away. Around 7 in the morning, the hallway went quiet again. I heard the freight elevator doors open and close multiple times. Coolers rolled over the floor. The executives left. The team departed. The building returned to its normal hospital hum, as if the hidden floor had simply finished a shift. I waited another 30 minutes, terrified I would step out too soon and be caught. When I finally pushed the closet door open, the hallway was silent and clean. The floor smelled freshly mopped, sharp with bleach. There was no sign of the children. No blood. No mess. No monster. I walked quietly back down the corridor to the plastic barrier. I slipped through the tear I'd made and stepped into the regular hospital hallway like I was stepping between worlds. Then, I did something I hate myself for. I smoothed the plastic down and pressed the duct tape back into place, hiding the tear. I went back to my folding desk and sat down like nothing had happened. 10 minutes later, the morning guard arrived. He smiled, handed me a coffee, and asked how my night was. I told him it was quiet. I handed him the radio. I walked to the elevator, rode it down to the lobby, and walked out into the morning sun. The day looked normal. Cars in the parking lot, nurses walking in groups, a visitor carrying balloons, ordinary life, right on top of the horror like a lid. I went straight to my apartment. I packed 1 duffel bag, clothes, toothbrush, anything I could grab fast. I took every bit of cash I had stashed away. I didn't leave a note, I didn't tell anyone. I went to the bus station and got on the first bus leaving the state. During a rest stop in a town I don't even remember, I threw my cell phone into a storm drain. I've been running for 3 days. I know they'll realize I'm missing. When I didn't show up for my next shift, my supervisor would have checked the cameras. He knows I abandoned my post. And if he inspects the plastic barrier, he'll find the spot where the tape isn't perfect anymore. He'll know someone pulled it. He'll know I saw what's inside. I can't stop thinking about the half-eaten lollipop. I can't stop thinking about the boy with the stuffed animal. I can't stop thinking about the nurse's face when I said 4th floor, how terrified she looked, how she told me I should forget the children if I wanted to keep breathing. I'm writing this because I need someone to know. I need the world to know there are places hiding in plain sight, sealed off with official-looking tape and signs, where the real reason for the barrier isn't what it says. If you are in a hospital and you see a floor sealed off for asbestos abatement, and you hear the squeak of an IV pole in the middle of the night, please don't assume it's ghosts. Ghosts don't drop candy. They're cutting them apart, and the things they leave behind are still alive. Story 3. I woke up face down in damp sand that didn't feel like any sand I'd ever touched. It wasn't beach sand. It was heavier, mustier, like it had been soaked and then left to rot. It clung to my hair and the side of my face. When I pushed myself up, grains fell into my eyes, and rubbing them only ground the grit in deeper until my eyelids burned. The first thing I noticed was color, or the lack of it. Everything was tan and gray and sickly pale. The sky was the same dull shade as the ground, like someone had washed the whole world in dirty water and then wrung it out. There was no clear sun, no bright spot in the sky to tell me direction or time. The light was even, flat, wrong. My head felt fuzzy, like I'd been sedated and then shaken awake too fast. I tried to remember how I got here, and my mind produced nothing. Not even a hint. No last memory. No image of a car, a room, a conversation. Just blankness that made my stomach tighten. I reached for my phone automatically. Nothing. My pockets were empty. I patted myself down harder, checking again like the phone might appear if I tried the right way. No wallet, no keys, not even loose change. It was as if I'd been dropped here without anything that could tie me back to my life. The smell hit me next. It was everywhere, soaked into the air, thick enough that it felt like it touched my skin. It smelled like wet clothes that never dried, like a basement that flooded years ago and never stopped being damp. It was a rank, stale odor that stuck inside your nose even after you tried to breathe through your mouth. I stood there for a long time, because standing still felt safer than moving. I couldn't tell how long, because time didn't work right without the sun and without any familiar rhythm. The sky didn't shift. The light didn't change. There was just this dull daylight that made everything feel exhausted. Eventually, I forced myself to do something. My throat was dry, but I called out anyway. Hello? My voice echoed, and the echo lasted too long. It didn't bounce back the way it should. It stretched out and drifted like sound in a huge, empty tunnel. That echo alone made the world feel wronger. Outdoors, sound doesn't usually behave like that unless you're in a canyon or a cave. Here, it felt like the air was a hard surface, like the sky itself was a ceiling. A breeze moved through the tufts of fiber that rose from the ground, like palm trees made from twisted string. Their tops leaned and shivered, and as the breeze lifted, it stirred piles of pale leaves scattered on the ground. The piles looked like dead foliage, but the color was off, washed out, almost gray-white. The movement revealed tiny creatures under one of the piles. They looked like beetles at first glance, but their mouths were wrong. Instead of mandibles, they had something like little fingers, thin and jointed. The fingers prodded at the leaf, pinched, then pulled a piece loose. The creature worked carefully, like it was doing a job. I took a step back without thinking, certain it would jump at me. It didn't. It stayed focused on eating. Then another one crawled out from under the pile. Then another. Then 10 more, like I'd disturbed an anthill and the entire colony was spilling into the open. More piles nearby began to stir, as if the sound of my voice or my movement had signaled something. Small bodies emerged in waves. They didn't come toward me. They didn't swarm me. But watching them pour out of the pale leaves still triggered something deep in my brain that screamed, "Move now." So I ran. Not a sprint at first, more like a frantic fast walk that turned into running when I realized how many piles there were. I dodged around them, leaped over twisting vines that looked like cords pulled tight across the ground, and darted between the tall fiber trees until my lungs burned. I only stopped when I saw color that didn't belong. 2 long plants, one green, one red, hung tangled high in the branches above me. They didn't grow upward like normal plants. They grew down, snaking from the canopy toward the ground like thick ribbons, wrapping around trunks and tangling with each other. They looked too bright against the bland world, like someone had painted them for emphasis. Above, caught in the branches and the green and red tangle, were clouds. But the clouds didn't move. They were puffy and soft-looking, shifting gently in place like something breathing in its sleep. But they didn't drift across the sky. They stayed caught above the forest like they were hooked on invisible nails. I stared up too long, then forced myself to move again. I decided to treat anything that stood out as dangerous. That seemed like the only rule that made sense. If it looked wrong, don't touch it. As I walked, I noticed more of the little beetle finger creatures. They were everywhere, but they didn't react to me unless I stepped too close to their piles. It took me a while to realize why. They were blind. They didn't turn their heads toward me. Their movements weren't tracking. They just followed scent or vibration or some kind of instinct I didn't understand. If I stayed away from their piles, they ignored me. If I disturbed their food, they poured out like spilled water. So I avoided the piles, and in return, they left me alone. Eventually, the thick forest broke and opened into what looked like a road. It wasn't paved. It was made of the same damp, brittle ground as everything else, packed down smoother in a long strip like something heavy had traveled over it for a long time. I stood at the edge of it, turning my head left and right. The road curved one way into the trees. The other way it rose up a shallow incline and disappeared over a hill. Someone had made a road. That thought gave me the first real spark of hope since I woke up. Roads meant civilization. Roads meant people. People meant answers. But choosing a direction was hard. Both directions felt equally empty. Nothing called to me, and standing there, frozen by indecision, let me hear something I hadn't noticed before. A dragging sound from the left. Slow, heavy, wet. Something big was coming around the bend, and I barely had time to dive behind a bristly tree trunk before it appeared. I pressed my body against the rough fibers, heart pounding so loudly it felt like it shook the wood. And then I heard a voice, a human voice, a young man's voice, grumbling like someone annoyed about being tired. The words were clearly English. My fear didn't vanish, but it shifted instantly into hope so sharp it almost hurt. I leaned out from behind the tree without thinking. I wasn't going to let another human pass me by. Not here. Not when I didn't even know if I was awake. What came around the bend was not human. It wasn't even close. It was a grotesque sack of hairy, pulsing flesh, roughly the size of a large dog but shaped wrong, like a thick worm forced into a lump. It dragged itself forward with stubby legs that looked too small to hold its weight. It had no eyes, no face the way a face should be, just folds of pale skin and long whiskers that protruded from its head like a mane, twitching as it moved. It turned toward me, not to stare because it couldn't, but it oriented itself in a way that made it clear it knew I was there. It panted, not excited, exhausted. "Damn," it said. "You scared me. I didn't know anyone else was out here. I stepped out anyway, because the alternative was staying behind the tree forever. My mind couldn't decide what I was more afraid of, the creature in front of me, or being alone again. "You can talk?" I asked. It made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Can you?" I hesitated, then nodded. The creature's voice shifted into something mildly annoyed. "See how stupid that question sounds?" "I'm sorry," I said. "It's just, where are we?" "The long road, of course." It said it like it was obvious. "You are full of strange questions, aren't you?" I swallowed. I don't know how I got here. There was a pause. The wrinkles of its face shifted, like it was thinking. "Oh, my light," it said, softer. "You aren't with your party, are you?" "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be rude. How did you get lost?" "I don't have a party," I said. "Not that I remember." I forced myself to say it clearly. "I don't think I'm supposed to be here at all. That is so much worse," it said, and somehow it sounded genuinely sympathetic. "But it could have been even worse if I hadn't found you. Your luck isn't as bad as it seems." It angled its head toward the hill. "We're on our way to see the prince, my friends and I. They're just over that hill." I fell behind a bit. I didn't like the word prince. It sounded like a story you tell kids. It sounded like bait. "The prince?" I asked. "Who is that?" The creature went still. Its whiskers twitched. The silence felt like I'd broken some rule I didn't know about. "You were a late hatch," it said finally. "That's how you got separated." "No," I said. "I'm not supposed to be here." "Right, right." It made a little grunting laugh, awkward this time. "Well, anyway, we're going to see the prince. Legend says he grants the wish of anyone who reaches the end of the road. But it's a long way. And there's bad stuff in the forest. It's all a test." It shifted its weight forward. "Me and my mates are going to pass it. You can come with us if you want." I stayed where I was. The idea of trusting this thing was insane, but the idea of walking into that forest alone was worse. "Who is the prince?" I asked again. "Wish granter," it said simply, like it didn't understand why I kept circling the obvious. "Come with us. We'll make sure no one hurts you. There are a lot of bad types in the forest. You have to stick to the road." Then it hesitated, and its tone turned cautious. Speaking of, you aren't one of those bad types, are you? You aren't tricking me? I don't have eyes. I don't know what you look like." "No," I said quickly. "I'm alone." "That doesn't mean you're nice," it replied, and the blunt honesty startled me. "But I can feel you there. I can feel the little mites in the trees, too." It huffed. "Here, follow behind me if that makes you comfortable. But you'll want to move before night. It's not safe to be out alone." It dragged itself forward, stubby legs working hard, hauling its heavy body uphill. Watching it struggle made me feel sick and, strangely, protective. How would something like that survive anything dangerous? And yet it was still alive, still traveling, still talking like this road wasn't even hard. As it moved away, I felt panic rise again. Night was coming, apparently, even if I couldn't see the sun. I had no food, no water, no shelter. If I stayed still, I would either die or go insane. So I followed. I kept a few yards back, far enough that I could run if it turned on me, close enough that I wouldn't lose it if the world shifted again. It struggled all the way up the hill and then turned slightly as if checking whether I had really come. "You came," it exclaimed, almost pleased. "Good. You'll be safe with us." Let me check with the others real quick. It dropped onto its belly and scooted downhill much faster than it had climbed. I crept to the top, scanning the trees behind me, half expecting something else to appear. Nothing did. At the bottom of the hill, I saw the others, a cluster of worm-like creatures huddled near the road. There were a lot of them. They looked similar, hairy, pale, stubby-legged, but each one had slight differences in size and texture. They waited like a group that had done this before, like a herd. My companion moved among them and seemed to speak. I couldn't hear their words clearly from the hilltop, but their bodies shifted like they were responding. My companion gestured upward. "Come on down," he shouted. I stared down at them, then back at the road behind me. From this height, I could see more bands of color woven through the distant trees, red and green like veins. Clouds caught low in the canopy, stuck in place. There was nowhere else to go, so I went down. There were 11 creatures waiting. A few gnawed at tree trunks with jaws that cut through the tough fibers like scissors through string. The sound made my teeth hurt. I realized then how dangerous they could be if they decided I was food. But they didn't look at me, not the way an animal looks at prey. They looked busy, focused, like eating and traveling were all they knew. My companion, who would later become Jim to me, shifted closer, as if trying to make me feel included. "Well," he said, "everyone is relaxing and eating. I'm sure you're hungry?" I was hungry. My stomach felt hollow and sour, but I couldn't eat trees. "I'll be fine," I lied. "You sure? Traveling alone must have been exhausting." "I'm fine," I said again, because I didn't want them to see weakness. He paused. "You feel afraid?" "Yeah." I couldn't deny that. "That's okay," he said gently, surprisingly gentle. "Sleep somewhere close by when you're ready. And if you get hungry, tell me." I lay down near the base of a tree where I could still see them. I wanted them in sight for 2 reasons. So they couldn't sneak up on me, and so I wouldn't feel alone. I hadn't planned to sleep. Not really. Sleeping felt dangerous. But exhaustion didn't ask permission. At some point, I drifted off. I woke to Jim's voice calling from a distance. The others were gone. He'd stayed behind just long enough to wake me up. The sky was shifting slightly, from dark gray to tan again, like the world only had 2 settings. I didn't know if I'd slept hours or minutes, but my body felt heavy. My mouth was so dry it hurt. Jim told me they were leaving. We had to move or we'd fall behind. On the road again, I couldn't hide my hunger. My stomach cramped. I kept staring at trees as if fruit might appear if I stared hard enough. "I know you can't eat the trees," Jim said casually, like he'd known all along. "If you're hungry, there are other things." "Like what?" I asked. "I don't see anything." Off the road, I saw a pile of pale leaves. The little finger-mouth creatures crawled over it, nibbling. The pile looked soft, almost like damp paper. It wasn't appetizing, but hunger changes what seems possible. I stepped off the road and disturbed the pile. The bugs scrambled out in a wave. I tried not to flinch, grabbed a piece of the pale leaf, and backed away. I hesitated only a second, then bit into it. The texture was chalky. It dried my tongue instantly. It tasted like raw flour mixed with mildew. It was awful, but my stomach didn't care. My stomach was a voice louder than my disgust. I ate again and again. I swallowed until the piece was gone. Eating made my thirst worse. There was nothing to drink. I stayed with Jim anyway. We had to catch up to his herd. They'd moved on without him, not slowing down, not waiting. When I asked about it, Jim didn't sound angry, more resigned. "Reaching the prince is their whole purpose," he said. "They can't stop for long." "I'll catch up. Then why did you stop for me?" I asked. Jim's answer came after a pause. "Because you were alone," he said, like that was enough, "and you needed help. That isn't how friends are supposed to act, I muttered, thinking of how easily his herd left him. Jim made a low sound, uncertain. Does that make us friends? I didn't answer then, but the truth was I didn't have anyone else. I didn't have a plan. I didn't even know where home was from here. And as gross as he looked, Jim was kind in a way I wasn't used to. Days passed, though I couldn't measure them properly. I learned to hunt for the pale leaf piles, the manna, Jim called them. Sometimes the flakes were damper, and those damp bits eased my thirst a little. Most days, they weren't enough. I grew weaker. I started talking less. My throat always felt scratched. My skin felt dry, like I'd been wrapped in dust. Jim kept moving. How much farther? I asked one time, voice cracking. I don't know, he admitted. I've never seen the end. Who knows how? The ground shook. A black spire slammed into the road nearby with such force that pale dust puffed up like smoke. I dropped to my knees instinctively, hands on the dirt. When the dust settled, I realized it wasn't a spire. It was a leg. A colossal leg, thick as a tower, covered in hair and lined with claws that dug into the ground like hooks. Above it, beyond what my eyes could frame, was a creature moving across the top of the forest at impossible speed, supported by many long appendages. I couldn't see its full body. I couldn't even understand its shape. I only saw pieces, legs and shadows in the way it blotted the light. Neither Jim nor I moved. Even his breathing stopped. The leg lifted, and the creature passed overhead. The forest trembled as it went. Then the pressure eased, and it was gone, leaving the trees swaying as if they'd just been brushed by something too big to notice us. Oh, light, Jim breathed. What was that? You don't know? My voice came out thin. Of course I don't. Jim snapped, panicked. His body quivered. Did you see how big it was? It was the biggest thing I've ever seen. That doesn't help, Jim said, and his whiskers rose like a frightened animal's fur. Did it see us? I don't think so, I whispered. It's gone. Jim stayed still for a long moment, then started dragging himself forward again as if motion was the only defense he had. Okay, he said, forcing steadiness. Okay, we have to keep moving. The others must be far ahead. We hadn't seen his herd in 2 days. The hares they shed along the road told Jim they'd stayed on this path, but they were moving faster than he could. Jim pushed himself harder. He stopped, resting. He suggested I sleep on his back so we could move while I rested. At first, I refused. It felt disgusting. It felt unsafe. Then I got so tired, I stopped arguing. I pushed aside the bristly hairs and lay on his warm back. The motion rocked me, but I couldn't truly sleep. His body's contractions kept jolting me awake. I didn't tell him, but he noticed. He kept speaking to fill the silence, asking about my world, asking what I looked like, asking whether I would change when we reached the prince. I told him my only wish was to go home. If my herd reaches the prince first, he said, they'll become angels with wings and eyes. They'll fly above all the trees. Is that where you're going to? I don't know, I said honestly. I don't even know where home is from here. Jim was quiet, then said something that made my throat tighten. I think I get you now, he murmured. You want to get back to your herd. Even though you're here with me, it isn't the same. His voice softened. We get along, but I miss them. I wiped my eyes with my sleeve, surprised to feel tears. Not just guilt for Jim, but because something in me recognized the feeling too sharply. I had a life somewhere, apparently. But did I have people? Did I have anyone waiting? Even before this strange place, I couldn't remember the last time I felt truly needed. Jim, at least, had a herd. He had a place he wanted to belong. That night, a storm hit. The tops of the fiber trees whipped and cracked. Lightning arced between them when their tips came close, like electricity jumping between wires. Thunder rolled across the forest. There were no clouds, no stars, just wind and light and noise. It never rained. The storm made the dryness feel cruel, like the sky was mocking me with violence, but refusing to give water. I began to wonder if I would die there, if anyone would ever know, if anyone would even notice I was gone. My apartment back home was always a mess. No one visited. My job would replace me with a phone call and a shrug. Dishes would rot in the sink until the smell made a neighbor complain. That was the kind of life I'd built, quiet enough that disappearing might not create ripples. The thought didn't even make me angry. It just made me feel empty. In the morning, I woke before Jim, which hadn't happened before. He was pressed against a tree trunk, breathing shallowly. His pale belly convulsed weakly. I didn't know how to wake him without getting crushed. When he finally stirred, his voice was faint. "Sorry," he managed. "I don't know what happened." "Come on," I said, trying to sound stronger than I felt. "We have to keep moving." "We're close," Jim said, and something in his voice scared me. Not fear, but certainty. I can feel it. Back on the road, we moved faster. Jim seemed rejuvenated by that rest. He even joked a little. He talked about the prince granting wishes again, eyes, wings, a new body. The more he described it, the more it sounded like a myth. But I'd already woken up in a world that shouldn't exist, so my standards for believability were broken. Wind picked up again, but this time, Jim froze. "Get under me," he whispered. "No," I said automatically. "What is get under me now?" Something was rushing through the woods toward the road like a flood. At first I thought it was water, but then I saw it was alive. Thousands and thousands of small bodies scrambling over each other in a single moving mass, a wave of legs and shells and finger mouths. The swarm poured toward us. Jim lifted his huge body, and I rolled underneath him just as the wave hit the road. His weight crushed the wind out of me. I couldn't breathe. His belly convulsed, squirming above my head and catching in my hair. Panic exploded in my chest. I tried to scream and couldn't. I tried to crawl and couldn't. My lungs burned. For a terrible moment, I thought Jim had trapped me to eat me. Then the swarm passed, and Jim's body jerked hard. Something tore. Something wet slid. He rolled off me, and I coughed until blood came up. I lay on my hands and knees, choking, trying to suck in air like it was a solid thing I could grab. When I looked at Jim, my fear turned into horror. His skin was gone in places, ripped away. Pale, fatty flesh showed beneath. One of the spider things crawled out of a wound, coated in Jim's inner slime. I slapped it away on instinct. It clung. I stomped it until it was pulp. "Jim?" I whispered. He didn't answer. 2 of his legs were missing. Only 4 remained, twitching weakly. "We're close," I said, desperate. "You have to get up. The prince will fix you." Jim finally spoke, barely audible. "No." "What do you mean, no?" My voice broke. "You said he grants wishes. The prince is right here," Jim said. I didn't understand. I looked down the road, expecting a palace or a person or anything. Jim exhaled shakily. "Right here. The end of the road." He went still after that. I sat with him a long time, not sure what to do, afraid to leave him, ashamed I was thinking about leaving. He'd carried me forward. He'd protected me. He'd fallen behind because he helped me. And now he was dying at the end, like he'd reached his whole purpose. And it still wasn't enough. "Thank you," I whispered, though I didn't know if he could hear. Then I stood and kept walking. I didn't walk faster, even though I could. I kept Jim's pace, slow and steady, like a way of honoring him, or maybe a way of punishing myself. The road curved and twisted. I slept when I had to. I didn't stop for food because hunger had become background noise, like an ache you stop reacting to after a while. In the morning, the trees thinned and a huge shadow took the sky. Something massive loomed ahead. After an hour of walking, the forest finally broke into a wide space filled with strange structures. The fiber trees were twisted together into huge shapes, like scaffolding. At their bases were massive clumps of warm, damp material, like enormous piles of lint. Embedded in the lint were hard casings, glassy and smooth, each one holding a creature like Jim. There were dozens, maybe hundreds. I stared at them, sick with the thought that this was where Jim was always meant to end up. Then a voice spoke. "Hello, child." The sound came from the center of the clearing, where thick fibers hid whatever was speaking. "You've come very far," the voice said, "but you do not belong here." I turned slowly, trying to locate him. "Are you the prince?" I asked. The voice made a soft sound that might have been laughter. "Your friend said I grant wishes," it said. "Where's your friend?" "He didn't make it," I said. Shame tightened my throat. "Take me home." Something popped, like a joint snapping into place. The voice changed. "You have a choice," it said. "To go home, you must change. It will hurt, but it does not have to hurt. There is a place where you can be the same forever, a place of dreams and wonder." I felt my stomach twist. "What do you mean by change?" "These creatures come to me for wings and eyes," the voice said. "Legs, bodies, minds. They cannot have what they want without becoming new." I backed up a step, suddenly terrified. "How do I get home?" "Wings," the voice answered simply. "And the other place?" I asked, even though part of me didn't want to know. He laughed again, and this time he stepped out from behind the fiber bundles. He was shaped like a man, huge, but wrong, not like a giant human, like something wearing the idea of a human shape without understanding it. Where his face should have been, there was a door, a literal door set into a blank surface. He crouched in front of me with a bow, as if he was being polite. His left hand reached up, grasped the handle, and opened his face. Inside was a tunnel. At the far end was sunlight. Not the dull tan light of this place, but warm, bright light that made my eyes water. I heard laughter, children laughing, real and clean and happy. The light spilled out and hit my skin, and it felt like comfort, like the best memory you have, the one you don't even deserve. "Change hurts," the voice said, and it came from everywhere, not from the doorman's mouth because he didn't have one. "Won't you come through the door instead?" My body wanted to step forward. My body wanted to drop everything and crawl into that warmth and let it erase hunger and thirst and loneliness. I thought about my life back home, or what I assumed my life was. A tiny apartment, a messy room, no friends calling, no one checking in. A life so gray it wasn't that different from this tan world, just with better lighting and more food. Why would I go back? Then I thought of Jim, dying on the road because he believed I could reach this place and get home. The door wasn't home, even if it looked better, even if it felt like heaven. It wasn't what he died for. I stepped backward. "And no," I said, shaking. "No, thank you." The door stayed open for a beat, like the prince was giving me one more chance to change my mind. It almost worked. I almost stepped forward anyway. Then the door closed. "Sleep," the voice said. The word hit my body like a command I couldn't resist. Exhaustion poured into me, heavy and irresistible. I stumbled away from him and curled under a tree near one of the hard casings, like an animal seeking cover. I didn't even have the energy to be afraid anymore. Something formed around me as I lay there. A casing. It hardened against my skin, trapping me in a tight capsule. I could have fought. I could have tried to claw my way out. But my mind felt distant, like it had already accepted this as the only ending that made sense. Pain exploded in my toes. It wasn't sharp. It was deep and constant. It crawled upward slowly, and time stopped making sense. Seconds, days, years, it all blended. I felt my feet dissolve into warm mush, thick and sticky, and I didn't even have the strength to scream. I felt my legs go next, then my hips, my stomach. Pain and numbness swapping places like waves. I thought about my life back home and realized I couldn't remember anyone's face clearly. Not family, not friends, not even my own, probably. I was a person who had lived without being held, and now I was melting away in a shell like that was the most natural thing in the world. My hands went. Fingers softened and vanished. Arms disappeared. The pain was everything, and then even the pain began to fade, and the fading felt like relief. I didn't know if I was dying. I found I was almost okay with it. Then the capsule cracked. Light poured in. Warm. Bright. The same kind of light that came from the door. For a 6 second, I thought I'd made the wrong choice, and the door was opening again for me. I tried to move. I tried to stay. I tried to reach. I didn't have arms, I told myself, but something heavy was attached to my back. Something I could move with effort. It fought against me as I pushed, and I didn't know why I was pushing, because staying would be easier. Then I heard music. A muffled song, distant but real, and something about it made me fight. It made me want to get up. It made me want to go higher. I pushed and widened the crack. I forced myself out of the capsule with legs I didn't remember having. I crawled into air that smelled cleaner than before. Still strange, but less stale. I looked down at the goop around me that had been my body and felt nothing but numb acceptance. The music called. I looked up and understood something simple. The road wasn't just forward. It was up. Jim would have wanted to go up. I spread my wings. They unfolded from my back like they'd always been there, blues and greens so bright they hurt my new eyes. The colors were almost violent compared to the tan world below. Each beat lifted me higher, and the music grew louder with every rise. I flew upward toward the sound until the light blinded me completely. Until I couldn't tell up from down. Until everything felt warm and right, and my eyes opened. A muffled song was playing somewhere in my room. My cheek peeled off the carpet with a sting. I was on the floor of my bedroom, face down like I'd collapsed there. The air smelled musty. Clothes were scattered everywhere. The room looked exactly the way I'd left it. Messy, neglected, familiar. My phone was ringing. The caller ID read scam caller. Slowly, my mind clicked back into place. Saturday. A midday nap. Me staying in while other people went out. Me always staying in. I ran a hand over my face and felt the grooves the carpet had pressed into my skin. My nap should have ended like it always did. Get up, stumble to the kitchen, find my vape, waste the day, repeat. But when I stood, something was different. I wanted sunlight. I wanted to go outside. The feeling was so strange it made me pause. I didn't have wings on my back, of course. When I turned, there was nothing there. But I still felt them, like a memory inside my muscles, like my body had learned how to move differently in a place I wasn't sure had been real. I walked toward the bathroom without thinking and glanced into the mirror. I saw myself, dirty clothes, unbrushed hair, tired eyes. I looked the way I always looked when I'd been alone too long. And behind me, in the mirror, was a doorway. Not a reflection of my bedroom door. A different doorway, filled with bright, warm light that didn't match the lighting in my apartment at all. The light looked like the light from the Prince's Face door. clean and inviting. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Then, the bathroom door, the real one, slowly swung shut by itself. Click, and the light in the mirror vanished like it had never been there. Story 4. I remember that night clearly, mostly because the hospital felt colder than it should have. Snow was falling outside, soft and steady, and the windows of the emergency department had that faint, foggy sheen they get when warm air keeps fighting with winter air. You'd think a place that runs on money and urgency could afford a heating system that works the same way every day. But hospitals are like that. Some parts are freezing, some are boiling, and nobody ever knows why. The smell was what bothered me first. Not the usual hospital smells, not the clean bite of disinfectant, or the sour edge of old coffee and tired bodies. This was different. It reminded me of people who hadn't bathed in a long time, but it had another layer under it, something damp and stale, like wet laundry left in a closed room, like a basement where the air never moves. I've always had a weird relationship with bodies. Most people who work in medicine learn to separate the person from the problem, at least enough to get through the day. I can do that with injuries, with blood, with broken bones, with the fast-paced, urgent stuff. But when it comes to death, I've never been comfortable. I've stood in cadaver labs before, the kind where they open a body and show you what's normally hidden. The first time I walked into one, the smell went straight through me. That sweet chemical rot, the heavy air, the way the body looks both familiar and wrong once the skin is pulled back. I remember thinking, if the world decided to hide all of this under flesh, maybe we should respect that decision. Maybe some things are meant to stay covered. But I'm also the kind of person who can't stop looking once something is revealed. Curiosity has always been my weakness. And that night, curiosity was what kept me in a room I should have left. The patient came in just after 2 a.m. The doors opened, and there was a rush, that sudden shift where an entire team becomes a machine. He was obtunded, barely responsive. No obvious breathing. His pulse was there, but weak and thready, like it was trying to escape. He had no identification, no wallet, no phone, no medical bracelet. Just a man brought in by someone who didn't stay long enough to explain anything. It was an obvious emergency, the kind you don't debate. Somebody called for a bed. Somebody called for respiratory. The crash cart rolled in. Monitors came out. Gloves snapped on. The overhead lights seemed brighter, even though they didn't change. Within minutes, he became the center of the entire department. That happens sometimes. You can feel it when the room shifts. The noise narrows. Everyone's focus tightens. Every voice gets sharper, more controlled. It becomes a performance that nobody wants to fail, because failing means a person dies. Resuscitation lasted an hour. An hour is a long time when you're doing CPR and pushing meds and watching the monitor refuse to give you anything hopeful. You could see it on the faces around me. At first, there was determination. The belief that if we just do everything right, we can pull him back. Then, there was that slow draining. The moment people start realizing they're not fighting to save someone anymore. They're fighting not to quit too early. They're fighting the feeling that death has already made its decision. The doctor ordered one last round of epinephrine. He did the final pulse check with 2 fingers pressed to the neck for longer than he needed to. His face didn't change. Then he straightened up and said the words in a flat voice that I'll never get used to. Time of death, 0247. Everything paused for half a second after that, the way a room pauses after a loud sound. Then the whole team shifted again, like a well-oiled system switching modes. The charge nurse disappeared from the room quickly. Monitors were silenced. The Zoll was shut off. Lines and tubing were disconnected carefully, but not removed. The body was still a body, and we're taught to treat it with respect even when the person is gone. The staff cleaned up. The doctor stepped away to start the paperwork and make calls, even though we had no family information. That's another part people don't think about. Death doesn't stop the job. It just changes the job. Normally after a death, you can see the body change in small ways. Warmth drains, skin becomes paler, the muscles relax, the face shifts into that empty stillness that makes you want to look away. The body cools because it's just meat now, and meat cools. Except this man didn't. 10 minutes passed, then more. He stayed warm. Not just not cold yet, but warm in a way that felt wrong. His color didn't change either. His skin didn't lose its life tone. His lips didn't go gray. It was as if the body refused to accept the verdict that had been spoken over it. Most of the staff left the room once the immediate tasks were done. That late at night, people start trying to clear out anything that might create complaints. Patients are sleeping, families are tired. The less visible chaos you make, the better. But I stayed. I told myself it was because there was still work to do, or because I didn't want to leave the nurse alone. The real truth is that something about the patient made me uneasy, and my brain wouldn't let me walk away until I had a reason. The primary nurse, she was sharp and experienced, the kind of nurse everyone trusts in a crisis, stayed too. She took the lead on post-mortem care, moving carefully and quietly. I followed her for a minute, then drifted to the side of the room, watching. I wasn't much for that part of medicine. I liked the fast stuff, triage, simple fixes, swabs and fluids and sending people home. I was good at it because it didn't require emotional depth. It required speed and focus. But the moment things got complicated, ethical questions, long-term suffering, the kind of decisions you have to live with, I'd feel myself fall behind. The room was quiet now. Just the three of us. Me, the nurse, and the body. She finally said what we were both thinking. "He hasn't cooled off yet," she said. "Can you get a temperature?" I almost scoffed because it sounded like superstition. But I did it anyway. I grabbed the thermometer, did it by the book, and stared at the result until my skin prickled. He was running hot. Not just warm. Fever hot. I looked up at the nurse. Her eyes were fixed on the number. She didn't speak right away. She took the device from me and checked again as if she expected me to have done it wrong. Same result. Her face tightened. She turned and left the room to find the doctor. The doctor came back looking annoyed, like he'd finally sat down and someone had ruined it. He'd been making calls, trying to locate next of kin, writing notes. He looked tired in that deep end-of-shift way where even your irritation feels slow. She told him the temperature. I watched his face change. Annoyance vanished. Fatigue sharpened into something else. His eyes widened slightly. Then he turned and walked out without saying a word. I stood there, confused, heart starting to beat faster. The nurse looked at me like she didn't want to admit she was scared. "What did we miss?" I asked. It came out quieter than I meant. Before she could answer, the doctor returned, pushing an ultrasound cart. That was when I felt the first true wave of dread. Ultrasound doesn't come out for death verification. It comes out when you're trying to find something alive. The doctor stopped in front of the bed and stared at us like we were in his way. "Expose the patient," he said. "I need to see something." I opened my mouth to argue, because what he was asking was insane. We had declared the patient dead. We'd stopped compressions. We'd moved on. You don't just reopen the moment like that. "What are you on about?" I asked, my frustration coming through. He didn't even acknowledge me. He sprayed gel across the patient's chest with quick, firm movements, refusing to touch the body directly any more than necessary. The gel looked too cold, too clear, like it didn't belong on skin that should have been cooling. As he pressed the probe down, there was a sound I didn't expect. A subtle cracking, like skin tightening and splitting, not tearing open, just cracking, like dried paint flexing. The sound raised goosebumps along my arms. He watched the ultrasound screen intensely. What appeared was not something I could label. Ultrasound images are always hard to read unless you've trained your eyes for them. But this looked like a shimmering mass, pulsing in an uneven rhythm, not like normal organs, not like a heart. It didn't have a clear outline. It was just motion, dense and alive in the wrong place. The nurse's voice trembled. "What is that?" The doctor lifted the probe away like he didn't want to keep looking too long. In a low, hushed tone, he said, "The patient isn't dead." I stared at him. "What?" "It hasn't been born yet," he said. The nurse looked like she'd been slapped. I didn't understand what he meant. Not fully. My mind tried to reject the sentence as nonsense. He said it again in a different way, like he was speaking to people whose brains were lagging. "There's something inside him," he said. "We have a narrow window." The only idea my brain could form slipped out before I could stop it. "Are you suggesting we do a C-section?" I asked, and even saying it sounded wrong. The patient was male. The patient had been declared dead. The patient was lying on a hospital bed with a chest full of gel. The doctor nodded. He didn't look excited. He looked urgent, grim, like he'd been waiting for this moment and hated that it was here again. "We have 5 minutes," he said. "Call birthplace. Tell them they're getting a new admit." Birthplace was what we called the maternity unit. The words didn't make sense together. But the doctor had already turned into motion. He started issuing orders. The room filled with staff so quickly I couldn't even track who came in first. People from different departments. People with different levels of experience. Everyone moving fast, without asking why, as if the why had already been decided and all that mattered was completing the steps. Monitors were reattached to the body. A sterile field was established. Someone snapped on surgical gloves. The cart rattled. The overhead lights seemed brighter. We began a procedure that my mind still refuses to label as real. An emergency incision on the chest of a patient we had already called dead. Not the belly, not the abdomen, the chest. The surgeon's hand was steady. The nurse's hands were steady. Mine weren't, not at first, but adrenaline makes you functional even when you're horrified. No one said this is impossible. No one said this is wrong. They moved like it had happened before, and they didn't want to waste time remembering how strange it was. When we finally delivered it, I felt the world tilt. A small neonate, wrapped in something like a placenta, slick and pale beneath the amniotic sac. It moved. It rustled. It made a sound that was almost a cry, but not fully. The sound was weak, but it was alive. There's a difference between a dying gasp and a living breath, and I heard the living breath. They cut the sac. They suctioned fluid. They warmed her. Someone called out numbers. Someone said she was breathing. Someone said her heart rate was good. Someone said baby girl, and I remember the way that phrase made my stomach flip. On February 17th, 2022, we delivered a healthy baby girl. They named her Cindy. I don't know who decided the name. A social worker, maybe. A nurse trying to make it feel normal. A doctor who needed to call her something other than the baby. The hospital needed a label to put on paperwork, and a name is a label that makes people feel less afraid. The police were involved, obviously. Social services, medical reviews. I gave statements until my throat felt raw. I watched my coworkers avoid eye contact with each other in hallways for weeks. Nobody wanted to talk about it out loud. Everyone wanted to pretend it had been a one-time freak event, something unrepeatable, something that could be filed under unexplained and buried under a mountain of other. Hospital stories. Cindy was placed under state protection. Social workers hunted for family. They searched records. Dina, I assume. I don't know what they did, only that they were busy for months and always came back with emptier faces. It turned out Cindy was the last of her line. No relatives, no parents, no one who claimed her, no one who even knew she existed. I tried to tell myself it wasn't my problem. I tried to be normal about it. But every time I walked past pediatrics or saw a baby in a stroller, my mind went back to that night, to that sterile smell, to the ultrasound screen pulsing with something that shouldn't have been there, to the doctor's voice saying, "It hasn't been born yet." And I thought about the man on the table. We never found out who he was. Not officially, anyway. Maybe the hospital did and kept it quiet. Maybe my security clearance wasn't high enough. All I know is that he arrived without ID and died without a name, and somehow a baby came out of him like a secret the body had been carrying. A year passed. Then, another. Cindy grew into a toddler in a system that did its best and still left children lonely. I checked in more than I should have. I asked questions I wasn't supposed to ask. I volunteered to help with paperwork, transport, anything that let me see her without looking like I was attached. Then last week, I brought her home. I applied to adopt her and got approved faster than I expected. Maybe because I had a stable job. Maybe because the state was relieved to place her with someone who already had a connection to the case. Maybe because nobody wanted to keep asking where she came from. I was terrified at first. Not of her, of myself, of failing her, of waking up one day and realizing I had taken on something I couldn't handle. But her checkups were normal. Her pediatrician said she was healthy, developmentally on track. She liked cartoons. She liked crackers. She liked to sit on the floor and stack things and knock them over and laugh like she'd invented gravity. My workplace even offered me maternity leave so we could get settled. That part should have felt like a blessing. It made me feel like the world was pretending nothing was strange. Like paperwork could sand down the edges of horror until it became a normal story about a woman adopting a child. For the first few days, I almost believed it. I set up a room, bought clothes, bought toys, learned the shape of her cries, the difference between hungry and tired and bored, learned how she liked to be held, learned what made her laugh, learned that she hated baths unless I sang to her. Normal parent things. Still, I couldn't shake certain memories. The smell in that hospital room, the way the body didn't cool, the ultrasound image that looked like a shimmering knot, the doctor refusing to touch skin with his hands, the way he looked like he'd done it before, the way he didn't act shocked, only urgent. And now, it's 9:46 p.m. on February 26th. I can't find Cindy. I have looked everywhere. The closet, under the bed, behind the couch, in the laundry pile, in places that make no sense because fear makes you check nonsense. My apartment is small. There are only so many places a child can go. Doors are locked. Windows are shut. I have checked them twice. And as I search, I feel something inside my chest. An intense pressure, deep and writhing, like something twisting behind my sternum. Not heartburn, not panic alone. It feels physical, heavy, alive, like something pressing outward from the inside, testing the space. It feels like a pulse that isn't mine. I keep trying to breathe through it, but each breath makes it worse as if my lungs are being crowded. I keep thinking about what the doctor said. The patient isn't dead. It hasn't been born yet. I don't know what that sentence means anymore. Not fully. I don't know if it was ever about Cindy at all, or if it was about something else that was using the same doorway. My hands are shaking as I write this, and I can't tell if it's fear or the pressure or both. All I know is my home feels cold, and the air smells faintly like bleach. Story 5. When I was around 16, I started drinking the way a lot of teenagers start drinking, not because I loved the taste, not because I had some refined interest in alcohol, but because it was what people did, and I wanted to belong. It didn't feel like a choice back then. It felt like a door that was already open, and if you didn't step through, you were the weird one standing outside in the cold. I grew up in Spain, in Corua, and if you know the city, you know the weather can change its mind every 5 minutes. 1 hour it's sunny and you're sweating in a hoodie. The next hour, the wind is so sharp it makes your eyes water. That night was one of those nights where it wasn't freezing, but it was cold enough to make you keep your jacket on. Cold enough that your hands want to stay in your pockets, and your breath feels loud when you talk. My friends and I didn't have money for good alcohol, and even if we did, we wouldn't have been able to buy it easily. We drank whatever we could get. Most of the time, it was cheap black vodka that tasted like cleaning product, mixed with whatever juice cartons were on sale. Off-brand mango, off-brand peach, off-brand something red that was probably not a real fruit. The kind of juice that is mostly sugar and artificial smell, and somehow that made it easier to swallow the vodka. The whole routine was embarrassing if you think about it like an adult, but at 16, you don't think like an adult. You think like a kid wearing a mask and hoping nobody notices you're still a kid. We'd go to checkout at the last possible moment, right at peak hour, just before it became illegal to sell alcohol. In Spain, it's usually after 11, so we'd show up before then, acting casual, trying to look older, trying to look like we weren't shaking inside. Sometimes we'd ask an older friend to buy it. Sometimes we'd get lucky with a cashier who didn't care. And yes, I even tried the fake ID thing. I didn't have a printer or anything fancy. I used those terrible phone apps where you edit an image with your thumb and the brush tool is basically just a blurry finger smear. I'd change the date of birth and think I looked like a genius. Most of the time, it didn't work at all. A cashier would glance at it, glance at my face, and laugh in that tired way adults laugh when they're not even angry, just disappointed. But the few times it worked, you felt like you'd hacked the world. You'd walk out of the store with that plastic bag swinging from your hand and your heart pounding like you'd just escaped something. That night was one of the nights where everything lined up. We got what we wanted. We weren't stopped. We weren't questioned too hard. We were high on the feeling of getting away with it before we even took a sip. We ended up in one of those parks with steep hills. Anyone from Corua knows what I mean. There are parks where there's a main spot, swings, a slide, the little kid area, and then everything around it is just grass, slopes, and darker corners where the lights don't reach properly. I've always thought it was funny, in a bad way, how the least lit areas are usually the ones you have to pass through if you want to get anywhere. Like the park design assumes nobody will ever walk there, which is exactly why teenagers walk there. We showed up with our outfits on, trying to look cool in that messy teenage way where cool mostly means baggy clothes and confidence you don't really have. Someone carried a speaker, and it was blasting Roju and Sticky Ma, loud enough that you could feel the bass through your ribs. The music was the kind of hyperpop that feels like it's trying to punch the air. The kind of music you play partly because you like it, and partly because you want to announce, loudly, that you don't care if anyone judges you. We found a bench in the darker part of the park and dropped everything there. There was a bag of ice that was already melting, and the water was dripping through the plastic as we walked. leaving little cold drops on our hands. Someone pulled out plastic cups. Someone poured vodka. The rule was always the same. 1 or 2 ice cubes, then alcohol until you said stop, and if you didn't say stop fast enough, that was your problem. Then juice to cover it up, even though it never really covered anything. The first sip was always awful. Every time. It tasted like bitter and sweet at the same time, like your mouth didn't know which direction to run. So you drank fast. You swallowed and swallowed until your throat burned and your eyes went a little watery, and then you waited for the moment when everything shifted and you felt lighter. That was the magic, I guess. Not the taste, not the drink. The moment when your body starts to float away from your nervous thoughts and you become louder, braver, sillier. The moment when you can laugh without thinking about whether your laugh sounds weird. We were sitting there talking, music loud, cups refilled too quickly, and at some point, nature called. That part always ruined the fun a little because it reminded you that your body is still a body, no matter how cool you're trying to act. The thing is, I was shy, and most of my friends were girls. I didn't want to make anyone uncomfortable by disappearing too close, or by making it obvious what I was doing. So I did what I usually did. I said I was heading off for a minute and jogged toward a tree line where it was almost pitch black. There's also something weirdly funny about running while drunk. Your legs feel too long. The ground feels softer. You feel like you're moving in a video game with bad physics. Even if you're not that drunk, it makes you laugh inside your own head. I found a spot behind a tree where I was pretty sure nobody could see me, and I started peeing, trying not to think about the cold and the fact I was standing alone in darkness. That's when the feeling hit me. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't a shadow. It wasn't even a clear thought. It was this suffocating emptiness, sudden and heavy. Like when you stare down a dark hallway at night and you can't explain why you're scared, but your body is scared anyway. Nothing had happened. Nothing had moved. The park was still full of distant music and faint voices from where my friends were, but they sounded far away now, like they were on the other side of a wall. I finished and turned around, looking down to make sure I wasn't stepping in anything gross. Then I lifted my gaze, and I saw something. The first second, my brain couldn't label it. It was just a shape emerging out of the darkness ahead, moving calmly and steadily. My mind did that panicked search it does when something doesn't fit. Is it a person? Is it someone from the group? Is it a random stranger? Is it a prank? Am I imagining it because I'm drunk? As it came closer, I realized it was shaped like me. Same height, same build, same baggy clothes, same posture, even the way the sleeves hung, even the way the fabric moved with each step. It was like watching a copy of myself walk through the park as if it owned the place. I never saw its face. That's the part that sticks in my throat when I try to describe it. Maybe it was too dark, but it didn't feel like too dark. It felt like there was nothing to see, like my eyes slid off the place where a face should have been, like my mind refused to focus on it, the way your mind refuses to focus on a word you're not allowed to read. It walked past me a couple of meters away, not close enough to bump into me, not close enough to touch, just close enough that there was no doubt I was looking at myself. And the weirdest part was the sound, or the lack of sound. It didn't make any sound at all. No footstep on grass, no crunch, no brush of fabric. It moved like it wasn't touching the ground, like it had never been there, like it didn't need friction. I stood frozen, urine still cooling on my skin, throat locked, heart hammering. My body didn't know whether to scream or stay silent. I wanted to shout something. Hey, who are you? What the hell? But my voice didn't work. It felt like the air was thick, like the moment had wrapped around my throat. The figure passed, and then it dissolved, not like it turned a corner, not like it walked into shadow and I lost sight of it. It simply faded into the night as if the night swallowed it. One step it was there. The next step, it was part of the darkness again. It left me with the tightest knot in my throat I've ever felt. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. My body kept sending mixed signals. Run, freeze, scream, shut up, look, don't look. I kept thinking that if I moved too quickly, it would reappear. Or it would turn around. Or it would be behind me. Finally, I forced myself to move, and I ran back toward the bench where my friends were. I don't know how I managed to act normal enough to talk. I don't know how I managed to shape words around that knot in my throat. But I got there, and I think my face must have looked wrong, because my friends asked what happened. I didn't tell them the whole thing. I couldn't. Saying it out loud would have made it real in a way I wasn't ready for. Also, I didn't want them to laugh. I didn't want them to look at me like I was crazy or dramatic. I didn't want to be the kid who saw something because he drank too much. So I did something simpler. I said I felt weird. I said I wanted to go home. I pushed hard enough that they agreed to walk me. It wasn't far anyway. That part should have felt comforting. The idea that I could be in my room with the door closed and the lights on. But the whole walk, I kept looking at shadows. Every time we passed a tree, my brain wanted to check whether I'd see that same shape again. My friends talked around me and laughed and kept sipping their drinks, and I kept trying to stay in their voices, like voices could protect me. Back home, I had a few more drinks, mostly because I wanted to prove to myself that it was just alcohol. That if I drank a little more, I'd relax, and it would turn into a dumb story. Nothing shook it off. Every time I opened my mouth, the image came back and cut my sentence in half. The memory felt like something sharp behind my teeth. It wasn't just fear. It was confusion so deep it made me feel stupid. Like my brain had been shown a shape it wasn't designed to hold. I think my friends assumed I was really drunk. I was skinny, and alcohol hits skinny people faster. That explanation fit. It was easy. It let everyone move on. The problem is, I couldn't move on. This happened in 2022, near the end of the school year. I still don't know what I saw. It hasn't stopped me from going out or living my life, but I avoid situations like that now. I don't run off alone into dark corners. If I have to pee, I find a real bathroom. If I'm outside, I stay where the lights are. I don't get separated from the group, not because I'm scared of being attacked, but because I'm scared of being shown something again. I've tried to explain it to myself in normal ways. I've told myself it was a homeless guy who just happened to wear similar clothes. Baggy clothes were everywhere then. People dressed alike all the time. I've told myself the darkness made my brain fill in details. I've told myself my hearing cut out because of adrenaline, because there's a real thing where your senses narrow when you're scared. I've told myself it might have been a weird alcohol moment. Dissociation, depersonalization, that thing where your brain disconnects slightly and you feel like you're watching yourself. I read about that later, and it fits in a vague way. Being drunk, cold, alone, in the dark, anxious, your mind can do strange things. I've also read about the doppelganger idea, not in a mystical, you're doomed way, but in the way cultures repeat the same kind of story because human brains are similar, everywhere. People see someone who looks like them. People feel like they're being watched. People describe the same sick feeling in their stomachs when they're alone in the dark. But no explanation fully lands, because whatever it was didn't feel like a person-to-person encounter. It didn't feel like I'd been noticed. It felt like I'd accidentally seen something that wasn't meant to be visible, like catching a reflection at the wrong angle, and realizing the room is bigger than you thought. And the part that keeps bothering me, even now, is the way it moved. Calm, steady, soundless, like it had all the time in the world, like it wasn't lost, like it wasn't surprised to be there, like it was going somewhere, and I was just an object it passed on the way. I'm open to any explanation at this point, not because I want it to be paranormal, but because I want relief. I want my mind to stop filing that memory under blind spot. I want to stop replaying it in the moments when I'm alone and everything is quiet. Because I can handle fear. Fear fades. What I can't handle is uncertainty that sticks. That night left me with a question I still can't answer. If that wasn't me, then what was it wearing?